Welcome to another edition of your Energy Quick Chat with me, Justina Okechukwu. The African Solar Industry Association recently released its 2023 annual Solar Outlook report. The report, which includes a country-by-country analysis, noted a growing spread of solar adoption across the continent, with AFI's SIA saying that it no longer is limited to the hotspots of South Africa, Morocco, and Egypt, as a total of 49 African countries are now said to be considering at least 1 megawatt of solar installations and 29 on more than 100 megawatts. Joining me now to unpack this report is John Van Zuylen, the CEO of Africa's Solar Industry Association. Now, talk me through the latest Africa Solar Outlook 2023 report.
Well, we've been releasing this report for 3 years now, really trying to collect as much data in a very transparent and easy way to understand what are the trends of solar across Africa. And as you rightly mentioned, solar in Africa used to be concentrated in just a handful of countries: Egypt, South Africa, Morocco, Kenya. The very interesting trends of the past year is that solar is now really spreading across the entire continent. South Africa, Egypt, Kenya remain big countries, but now we see more and more pockets of solar markets developing across the continent.
So how do you determine what type of energy is needed in a particular region, whether wind or solar, as well as capacity needed?
Well, there's really two levels of looking into this. There's at the national level, the authorities will determine some long-term plans in terms of what they expect to be the population growth and the power consumption growth, and they make power plant development plans accordingly. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. This is unfortunately the reality across the continent. But then again, you also have individuals and companies making their own choices based on their own unique needs, because this is now possible. Companies and individuals can procure their own solar projects for their own consumption. And this is really something very interesting happening throughout Africa.
Now, speaking about corporate PPAs, what are the pros and cons of the adoption of a corporate PPA and grid codes as policy measures to accelerate the clean energy transition?
Well, there's really big differences between countries in Africa. And to speak specifically about CNI, as we call it, the commercial and industrial segment, as well as the residential, for example, we see in South Africa and in Kenya, very recent policy developments that now allow consumers to re-inject solar electricity into the grids and get some form of credit for this. This is called net metering, and this is really like a game changer in the solar industry because it allows for much bigger solar installations and in some cases covering up to 100% of your electricity consumption thanks to solar. So this is a really interesting trend to follow, something that AFSIA really tries to promote across the entire continent in cases where this is really beneficial, because this might not necessarily be beneficial for all countries across Africa. So it's really like a case-by-case basis.
That's interesting. So when it comes to a permanent energy source, will there come a time where we ditch the regular national grids, as you already know, that's what we're used to, and now go to solar 100%?
I don't think any reality of a country will be 100% without the grid, because in places where the grid already exists, it's beneficial. It's there and it's for everybody to use. Now, the reality is that in some countries, the grid is a little weak and not performing very well. And unfortunately, still in many, many locations across the continent, there simply is no grid. In those cases, well, people and companies are tempted to go, if they can afford it, are tempted to go 100% solar by themselves, off grid. And so this is potentially a risk for the national utility company. But you could also argue that this is a healthy pressure on the national utility company to provide a better service. So market forces play their role, and whenever people have an opportunity to get cheaper and more stable electricity through solar, it's only natural that they will make that choice.
So there are some concerns that have been voiced about the fact that Africa will continue to depend on foreign imports of solar equipment. What are your thoughts on this?
I understand this concern. There is a global trend about localizing industry, getting control on supply chain after all the difficulties that we've known throughout the COVID crisis. But then again, at some point, it's impossible to be producing everything by yourself. And in our solar industry, it just turns out that Chinese companies are very, very efficient at producing the basic equipment for solar components. There are some companies locally based in Africa that do have an advantage, a competitive advantage to produce some of those components. But I don't think it's realistic to hope that 100% of components for solar installations be manufactured in one country in Africa. There is a lot more to gain by procuring cheap solar equipment to provide efficient and cheap solar electricity to local companies rather than producing locally.
Now, what would be the major driver for the full adoption of solar as a renewable energy source?
I think there's really two main drivers. Number one, the costs. If solar equipment and especially storage equipment continues to decrease in price, well, it makes solar energy become more affordable. And progressively, it may simply be more affordable than grid electricity overall. Whenever that is the case, again, it's only normal that people would make that choice. But then even with cheap equipment, not everybody may have the cash to purchase a solar installation upfront. It's like buying 20 years worth of electricity at once. And so the second component to make this adoption become a reality is the growth of the finance industry when it comes to solar. With local banks better understanding solar installations and be able to provide the financial products adapted to this. And also with international investors to accept the country risk or the continent risk and be ready to invest more money in bankable projects across the continent.
Now, this is 2023. So what countries should we look out for to lead this solar electricity transition in Africa?
So this is always a tricky question that I get because I think, honestly, I'm not trying to avoid the question, but honestly, there are many great opportunities all across the continent. Now, every country in Africa is different. Every country has its own specificities and perceived country risk. And so not each country is a good destination for each investor. But then again, there's always investors who are looking for more or less risk and more or less returns. So globally, there are opportunities everywhere across the country. But clearly, when we talk about market size, South Africa is an absolute leader, unfortunately, because of all the load shedding issues that the country is experiencing right now. But Nigeria is a very big market as well. Kenya, still pushing through. And then if I had to place two bets for this year, I would keep a particular close eye on Tanzania and Ivory Coast, where I see a lot of things moving. And we shall expect some very interesting developments in the near future.
Thank you so much for those eye-opening insights and your outlook of the solar industry, John Van Zuylen, CEO of Africa Solar Industry Association. We appreciate you, sir. Thank you so much. And that's it on your Energy Quick Chat today. I am Justina Okechukwu. Bye-bye.